Traditional negotiation theory rests on a fundamental misconception that humans are rational actors who make logical decisions based on self-interest. For decades, Harvard's getting to yes approach dominated the field, advocating for principled negotiation, win-win solutions, and splitting the difference to reach compromise. Chris Voss, the FBI's former lead international kidnapping negotiator, discovered through life-or-death situations that this approach is dangerously flawed. When a bank robber holds hostages, when terrorists make demands, when someone stands on a ledge threatening suicide, logic doesn't work. Appeals to reason fail. The rational approach crumbles because humans are fundamentally emotional creatures who make decisions with their hearts and then rationalize them with their heads. This book represents a paradigm shift. Negotiation as emotional intelligence and tactical psychology rather than mathematical game theory. The techniques Voss developed, refined through hundreds of kidnapping cases, suicide interventions, and high-stakes international crises, apply to every negotiation you'll ever face, from buying a car, to asking for a raise, to getting your teenager to do homework. The old model assumed negotiation was a rational problem-solving exercise between logical actors seeking mutual gain. But neuroscience reveals something different. The emotional part of our brain, the limbic system, makes decisions first. Then the rational part, the neocortex, creates post hoc justifications. Think about major life decisions you've made. Did you really create a spreadsheet comparing your romantic partners? Did you mathematically calculate which job to take? Or did you feel something, make a choice, and then explain it to yourself and others logically? Why you should never split the difference. The title itself is provocative. We're trained from childhood that compromise is virtuous. Sharing is caring. Meet in the middle. But quick compromise has three fatal flaws. It leaves value on the table. The classic negotiation story involves two sisters fighting over an orange. Traditional advice? Cut it in half. But what if one sister needs the peel for baking zest and the other wants the juice? By splitting it, both get less than optimal outcomes. If they'd asked better questions and understood each other's real needs, one could have had all the peel and the other all the juice. It prevents you from discovering the truth. When you rush to compromise, you never learn what's actually driving the other person. Their stated position, I can't pay more than $50,000, may mask their real concern, budget timing, need for approval from someone else, or fear of making a mistake. Until you understand the underlying drivers, you can't craft truly creative solutions. It creates mediocre solutions nobody loves. Compromise often produces outcomes where both parties feel they gave up too much and got too little. Nobody's excited, nobody's committed. The agreement exists on paper but lacks the emotional buy-in needed for successful execution. The goal, getting to truth, not yes. The fundamental reorientation Voss proposes is this: negotiation isn't about quickly reaching agreement. It's about discovering what's really happening, what the other person truly wants, fears, values, and needs. This requires slowing down, being patient, asking questions, listening intensely, creating psychological safety so the other person reveals information they hadn't planned to share. Technique 1. Mirroring. What it is repeating the last 3 words or the critical 1 to 3 words someone said with an upward inflection, like a gentle question. Why it works? Mirroring is rooted in neuroscience. When you mirror someone, you activate their mirror neurons, brain cells that fire both when we perform an action and when we observe someone else performing it. This creates unconscious bonding and similarity. Mirroring also signals that you're paying attention and creates a subtle invitation for elaboration. Humans have a deep psychological need to be heard and understood. When you mirror, you're essentially saying, "Tell me more," without actually saying it. How to execute. Use the late-night FM DJ voice, slow, calm, downward inflecting, and reassuring. Mirror the last few words or the most important words. Add upward inflection to sound curious, not interrogative. Stay silent after mirroring and let them fill the space. Examples. Scenario 1. Salary negotiation. Manager. We can offer you $70,000 to start, though if you perform well, there's opportunity to move up after 6 months. You. $70,000. Manager. Yes, that's the top of the range for this position, though if you perform well, there's opportunity to move up after 6 months. You've just learned there's flexibility and a timeline without arguing or countering. Scenario 2. Client objection. Client. This timeline is too aggressive. You. Too aggressive? Client. Yeah, we need at least 3 weeks for internal review before anything gets approved. Now you understand the real constraint is internal process, not your timeline itself. Scenario 3. Personal relationship. Partner. I don't want to go to dinner with your parents. You. Don't want to go? Partner. I'm exhausted, and your dad always criticizes my job. I just need 1 weekend to decompress. You've discovered the real issue is exhaustion and family tension, not rejection of your parents. Common mistakes. Mirroring too aggressively or with wrong tone, sounds sarcastic. Talking immediately after mirroring instead of staying silent. Mirroring everything. Use sparingly when you need elaboration. Technique 2. Labeling. What it is identifying and verbally acknowledging someone's emotions or situation using phrases like, "it seems like," "it sounds like," or "it looks like." Why it works? Emotions are like wild animals. Ignore them and they attack. Acknowledge them and they calm down. Neuroscientists have discovered that when you label an emotion, you reduce activity in the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, and increase activity in the prefrontal cortex, the rational thinking part. Literally, naming emotions tames them. Labeling also demonstrates empathy and builds trust. When someone feels understood, their defenses drop. They stop fighting and start collaborating. The 3 functions of labeling. Diffuses negative emotions. It seems like you're frustrated with how this has gone. Suddenly, the anger is out in the open where it can be addressed rather than manifesting as stubbornness. Amplifies positive emotions. It sounds like this solution could really work for your team. This reinforces good feelings and creates momentum. Gathers information. People typically elaborate after being labeled, either confirming, "Yes, exactly," or correcting you, which still gives you insight. Advanced technique. The accusation audit. Before a difficult negotiation, list every terrible thing the other person might think about you or your proposal. Then proactively label these concerns at the start of the conversation. I know you're probably thinking I'm asking for too much money when the budget is already tight. You might be thinking my performance this year hasn't warranted a significant increase. You could be concerned that if you give me a raise, others will expect the same. And honestly, you might be wondering why I think I deserve this when there are people who've been here longer than me. What happens? Their defenses collapse. They think, well, at least this person gets it. They're not delusional. It neutralizes objections before they're even voiced. Examples. Difficult negotiation. Them. Visibly tense, arms crossed. You. It seems like you've had bad experiences with vendors in the past, and you're worried about getting burned again. Them. Actually, yes, our last vendor overpromised and underdelivered, and it cost us a major client. Now you can address their real concern, trust and reliability.
Scenario 2. Team conflict. Colleague. Short responses, avoiding eye contact. You. It looks like something I said in the meeting upset you. Colleague. You took credit for my idea in front of the director. You've uncovered the real issue instead of dealing with passive-aggressive behavior. Scenario 3. Sales call. Prospect. Hesitant, asking lots of detailed questions. You. It sounds like you need to be absolutely certain this will work before you can commit. Prospect. I got fired from my last job for approving a software purchase that failed. I can't make that mistake again. Now you understand the personal stakes and can provide extra assurance. Critical rules for labeling. Use tentative language like seems like, sounds like, not absolute statements.
Here's something fascinating. The way you frame a negotiation literally shapes what people think is possible. Voss calls this bending reality, and it's based on principles from behavioral economics and prospect theory, which psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky developed. The key insight is this: people don't evaluate offers objectively. They evaluate them relative to something else, an anchor, an expectation, or a reference point. And you can control what that reference point is. Let's talk about anchoring first. In any negotiation, whoever makes the first offer establishes the anchor, the number around which the entire discussion revolves. If you're selling a car and you start at $15,000, that's the anchor. Even if you eventually settle at $12,000, that number was shaped by the original anchor. But here's what most people get wrong. They think they should start with a reasonable number. Voss says that's a mistake. You should start with an anchor that's at the edge of reasonable, what he calls an extreme anchor. Why? Because it expands the zone of possible outcomes. If you're negotiating salary and you anchor at $70,000 when you'd be happy with $60,000, you've given yourself room to negotiate, and you've made $60,000 feel like a win for the other side. But there's a crucial technique here. When you throw out an extreme anchor, you need to make it seem thoughtful and justified, not arbitrary. You might say, based on the market research I've done and the value this role creates, I'm looking at a range starting around $90,000. Notice the softening language. Based on research, the value this creates, starting around. You're not being aggressive, you're being confident and informed. Now, what if someone anchors you first with a lowball offer? Voss has a brilliant tactic. Treat it like a joke, not with disrespect, but with lighthearted disbelief. I'm sorry, that number is a bit low for what we're discussing. How am I supposed to do that? The last part is crucial. How am I supposed to do that? It's not defensive or confrontational, it's a genuine question that forces them to solve your problem. Another reality-bending technique involves deadlines. People make terrible decisions under time pressure. They panic, they compromise, and negotiators use this against us all the time. This offer expires Friday. We need an answer by end of day. These artificial deadlines create urgency that works in the other party's favor. Voss says most deadlines are flexible. When someone gives you a deadline, he suggests treating it skeptically and even pushing back. What happens if we don't decide by Friday? Often, the answer reveals that the deadline isn't as firm as they implied. Here's another cognitive bias you can leverage: loss aversion. People are more motivated to avoid losses than to achieve equivalent gains. This is why "don't miss out on this opportunity" is more compelling than "take advantage of this opportunity." In negotiation, you can frame your proposals in terms of what the other person stands to lose if they don't agree. Not in a threatening way, but by highlighting the cost of an action. I understand you're hesitant about this investment. What do you think it will cost if you don't solve this problem this year? Suddenly, they're not comparing your price to zero, they're comparing it to the cost of the status quo. Voss also talks about using odd numbers to increase credibility. When you're negotiating price, don't say, "I can do it for $10,000. Say, "I can do it for $9,843. Why? Because round numbers feel arbitrary. Specific numbers feel calculated and researched. They suggest you've done precise analysis to arrive at that exact figure, which makes the offer more credible.
Finally, there's the concept of fair. This word is incredibly powerful because everyone hates feeling like they're being treated unfairly. When someone says, "I've given you a fair offer," they're usually trying to manipulate you. The word fair is being used to make you feel guilty for negotiating. His response, call it out. "I apologize. Let's make sure I'm treating you fairly. Can you help me understand what I did that was unfair?" This flips the script and forces them to articulate their position, rather than just using fair as an emotional leverage. But you can also use fair proactively as a shield. "I want to make sure I treat you fairly throughout this process. Please stop me if you feel I'm not doing that." This establishes you as someone who values fairness, which builds trust and makes it harder for the other side to use manipulative tactics. Now, we come to perhaps Voss's most powerful technique, calibrated questions. These are open-ended questions that start with what or how, and they completely change the dynamic of a negotiation. Here's why they're so effective. Calibrated questions put the other person in problem-solving mode on your behalf without them realizing it. When you ask, "How am I supposed to do that?" or "What about this doesn't work for you?" you're not arguing or pushing back. You're asking for help. You're inviting them to explain their constraints, and in doing so, to find solutions that work for both of you. Let's break down some calibrated questions and why they work. How am I supposed to do that? This is Voss's favorite. Use it when someone makes an unreasonable demand or an insulting offer. It's not hostile, it's genuinely curious, and it forces them to confront the unreasonableness of what they're asking. If a client says, "We need this done by Friday for half your usual rate," responding with, "How am I supposed to do that?" makes them think through the logistics. Often, they'll realize they're asking for the impossible, or they'll start problem solving. "Well, maybe if we reduce the scope." What about this doesn't work for you? This question is brilliant for handling objections. When someone resists your proposal, instead of defending it or immediately compromising, you ask them to articulate the specific problem. This gives you information and makes them think more carefully about whether their objection is legitimate. What would you need to make this work? This transforms the conversation from confrontation to collaboration. You're essentially saying, "I want this to work for you. Tell me what success looks like from your perspective." They'll often reveal information about their priorities and constraints that you can then work with. How does this look to you? A softer version of asking for agreement. It invites their perspective without pressuring them to commit. It also uncovers concerns they might not have voiced yet. What's the biggest challenge you face with this? This question is gold in sales or business development. It gets people talking about their real problems, which allows you to position your solution as the answer to those specific challenges. Here's what makes calibrated questions so powerful. They create the illusion of control. When you ask someone how or what, they feel like they're in charge. They're the ones providing answers and solutions. But in reality, you're guiding the conversation. It's like inception. You're planting ideas in their mind, but they think they came up with those ideas. And people are far more committed to solutions they believe they created. There's also a neurological component. When you ask someone a how or what question, you engage the problem-solving part of their brain. They literally can't help but start thinking about solutions. It shifts them out of emotional reactivity and into analytical thinking. Compare these approaches. Aggressive. "That price is ridiculous. We're not paying that." Defensive. "Well, actually, if you consider our costs and the market rate." Calibrated. "How am I supposed to justify that price to my team?" The first two create conflict. The calibrated question creates collaboration. The other person now has to explain their pricing logic, and in doing so, they might realize their price isn't as justified as they thought, or they might help you understand value you hadn't recognized. One critical note: avoid questions that can be answered with yes or no. These are closed questions. They shut down conversation. You want open-ended questions that require thoughtful responses. Also, avoid why questions. "Why are you asking for that much?" Sounds accusatory. It puts people on the defensive. What and how questions feel more neutral and curious. Voss also emphasizes using calibrated questions to say no without actually saying no. If someone proposes something you can't accept, Don't reject it directly, ask questions about it. How would that affect the timeline? What happens to the other deliverables if we do that? How does this compare to what we originally agreed on? These questions highlight problems with their proposal without you having to be the bad guy saying no. Finally, use calibrated questions to guide implementation. Once you've reached an agreement, ask questions like, how will we know we're on track? And what do we do if we run into problems? These questions surface potential obstacles before they derail the deal. The beauty of calibrated questions is that they work everywhere. Business negotiations, relationships, parenting. Anytime you want someone to think more deeply or solve a problem with you rather than against you, calibrated questions are your tool. Here's a painful truth. Getting someone to agree to a deal is only half the battle. If they don't actually follow through, the agreement is worthless. Voss learned this lesson the hard way in hostage situations. A kidnapper might agree to release someone, but if they have a change of heart or if someone else in their organization objects, the deal falls apart. The same thing happens in business all the time. Someone agrees to your terms, but then they go silent, or they don't deliver, or suddenly there are complications. So, how do you guarantee execution? Voss offers several techniques. First, identify all the potential deal killers. Who else has a say in this decision? What internal processes need to happen? What might cause the other person to back out? This is where calibrated questions come in handy. How will you handle getting approval from your boss? What challenges do you foresee in implementing this? You want them to think through the obstacles before they arise.